Já, það held ég kæru Pingju Hálsar. Það líklega stærsti þáttur okkar Pingjubræðra framöndan svona í krónumtalið.
Já.
Það ekki það?
Jú, það passar. Já, dollurumtalið.
Já.
Hann Keresis mættur.
Já, í kringum 1 Keresis af virði. Fyrsti miljardar mæringur, sko, það ekki bara í fyrsti miljardar mæringur sem að Íslands hlaðvarp fær? Nei, Róbert Westman vissulega hefur komið í eitthvað hlaðvarp. Heiðar leynir á sér. Er hann $1 miljard?
Já, ég veit.
Við erum að tala $1 miljard hér, sko. Við tölum núna í dollurum, sko. En það Mark Dixon, stofnandi og í rauninni framkvæmdastjóri, eða forstjóri,
Regus.
Já, áður hérna Regus.
Regus, hvernig áttu maður aftur að beita það? Regus.
Hvað segirðu?
Regus.
En núna það I2VG sem að móðurfélagið og rekur mörg svona undirbrönd. En við erum að sjálfsögðu með samstarfsaðila hérna í dag, sem fyrr. Og það þarf nú eiginlega ekki, sko, að minnast á það, en þessi þáttur svona mestuleiti búið Regus þetta. Já,
sjálfsögðu, jú.
Við verðum eiginlega að segja það. Og þið heyrið það bara í þættinum hvað benefitið á því
Já.
Herru, svo Keldan núna. Og ég eingöngu farin að snúa mér. Það hefur dreifð til stórtíðanda. Ég hættur að skoða fréttamiðla. Ég bara farin í fréttaleitina á Keldunni. Og maður náttúrulega búin að vera duglegur að fylgjast með bréfun líka. Það mikið í gangi á mörkuðum. Og
nú þurfum við að fara að henda mark hérna inn einhvers staðar á Kelduna.
Já, þurfum að gera það. Það Dominos, bestu pizza bæjarins. Hér með það slegið. Við viljum hvetja ykkur til að kíkja á tilboðin þar. Það alltaf eitthvað sem ber á góma. Nú hásumars tilboð og ég veit ekki hvað og hvað. Já, bara að gera pantreina pítsu og hlusta á þetta viðtal. Það hvað, 70 mínútur. Það svona gamla góðu kjöraðstæðunar eins og við höfum talað um. Nú, Inkasso, einnig, vertu í hópi
Inkasso!
Fjastu mikið lof fyrir þetta?
Já, ég nú þetta ekkert fengið.
En vertu í hópi ánægðustu skuldaralandsins með Inkasso. Eða, sko, þú veist, það bara staðreind að þar eru ánægðustu skuldarandir, en það eru vissulega fyrirtækin sem að sjá innheimtuna.
Inkasso.is,
þannig að
farið viðskipti,
þetta tekur enga stund til að koma ykkur yfir í viðskipti þar og að lokum síðastir en alls ekki sístir Payday. Segðu mér eitthvað nýttar.
Við erum svo nálægt 4.000, við fáum ekki bjössaði viðtal.
Nei,
það verður stærsta viðtal í sögu Pingjunar og eftir Mark Dixon ef við komumst í 4.000 fyrirtæki, þannig að bara
ég vil benda á að fara að bóka með Payday bara strax í dag. Þetta ekkert eðlilega þægilegt fyrirkomulag og þið munið ekki sjá eftir því. Þökkum þessum samstarfsaðilum kærlega fyrir.
Já, við komum því miður ekki að með Mark.
Við náðum því ekki, því miður. En það hins vegar stórkostlegt viðtal í vændum, það sem að við spyrjum hann Björn Múr, þú svona aðeins meira en ég.
Já, ég elskan. Ég elskan.
Og ég gerir það líka, frábær gæi. En þá segi ég bara gjörðu það svo vel, kæru hlustendur.
Okay,
og hann valdi hérna Here Comes the Sun.
Já.
Svo að það komi fram.
Here Comes Mark Dixon.
Frábært lag. Mark Dixon, gjörðu það svo vel. Yes, Mr. Mark Dixon.
Here comes Mark.
Welcome to Pingjan. Absolute pleasure to have you. And welcome to Iceland.
Well, thank you very much for the welcome.
Are you here for business or pleasure? Or?
Well, I'm here for business mostly.
Mostly?
But I've got 2 days of fishing.
Okay. Where?
I'm not sure where. I have to ask my partner here.
Yeah.
But no, in the countryside at a lodge. So my passion, apart from business, is fishing.
Fishing.
Fly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sea fly.
Yeah. Okay.
Sea fly fishing.
But it's the first time you've been to Iceland?
Unfortunately, yes. It's a wonderful place.
Really?
I've been to most places in the world, but never Iceland. So I'm really happy to be here and to experience the country for the first time.
We're happy to have you.
So where have you been fly fishing before?
What's
your favorite spot?
A very short story here. Lots of places, but the main place was a house. When I lived in America on Long Island Sound, I had a house on on an island, and I had a small beach, so I'd fish whenever the fish came around. When I saw them come, even when I was having guests for a dinner party, I'd put on my waders, have the rod ready, and cast.
What was it, salmon then, or
no, striped bass?
Striped bass.
They're good fighting fish.
Yeah.
It's New York, so you don't eat the fish, but they're fighting fish.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope you'll get a good fight with a salmon while you're here.
Thank you.
What's the Icelandic word for stripe bass?
Bass.
Stripe bass.
Striped bass. It's you have to get someone to look it up on Google.
Yeah,
we will. So, Mark, you have quite an interesting journey to success, at least according to Wikipedia. Barman in St. Tropez, a miner in Australia, a farmhand in Asia. Is that accurate?
Actually, a farmhand in Australia, but
okay.
And I did mining there. I wasn't actually doing the mining. I was actually repairing the roads on the mine, which was a much worse job than doing the mining.
So, how old were you at this time?
17.
17.
Yeah, I went around the world. I did a round the world trip to gain experience.
Okay.
And so many lots of different work, and gained experience.
How was it at this time? Because it's fairly common today that you just skip school and go travel around the world. But must be in the 70s, right, or 60s?
70s.
Yeah.
This is my father didn't speak to me for several years because I left school.
Yeah,
and I was a very good student.
That was a big deal
at school. It was a big deal, and my father wanted me to go to university, and I could have gone to a very good university, but I wanted to go University of Life immediately without stopping.
Yeah.
So I left school at 16 and started my first business, sold that business, and then I went around the world. So because I realized, much as I thought I knew everything at 16, I knew nothing at all. And I wanted to gain experience. So I set a target to not go and work. I wasn't trying to make money. I was trying to learn from really great people all over the world, and do interesting things. And that's what I did. It took
Mission accomplished,
right?
Yeah.
Well, no, it's been fantastic for other businesses I've done. I think sometimes the University of Life can be a very good education. I mean, there's nothing wrong with going to university, but you need both. And that experience has set me up for every business I've done since. And, doing global businesses, I mean, I have no fear of doing business in any place in the world.
So back to this first business, was that the sandwich making or?
That was Dialer Snack, the famous Dialer Snack, which was a very simple business, basically. It's like, you see food delivery all over the place, all over the world today. I was doing this in 1975, 76. Delivering, I used to get orders on telephone, old-fashioned telephone, make them and deliver them on a bicycle because I was too young to have a driver's license. So I had a bicycle and I'd go around the town and deliver them. And it was
And this is when you're what, 14 or 16?
16.
This is the 16. And I was interested in hearing, just opportunities, how did this come about? Did you just see a need?
Gap in the market.
Oh, really?
I think every business I've done, there's always been a gap in the market.
So who was the big competitor that wasn't serving the
needs? There was no competitor.
Oh,
it was just something I could see people, even in those days, basically, especially the offices that were a long way away from the town, people had to walk a long way to then go to a sandwich shop. So all I was doing was really looking at that and saying, well, look, there'll be quite a few people that if I give a good service, make good sandwiches, that they will order them, I can make a margin. And I don't have to have a shop. Shops are expensive.
Oh, yeah.
But you sold that business, right?
I sold it to a sandwich shop.
Yeah,
really?
At 16.
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
A small amount of money. This was not the most famous business, but it was good experience. I mean, the main thing in business is trying not to lose money. So here I got my money back and made a small amount of money. It's certainly enough to get around the world with.
Okay. So you were in high school at that time, or
no, I'd left.
You dropped
out.
I dropped
out. Yeah,
at 13 or
16.
Yeah, 16. At 16. Okay, this was Wasn't this before that? Oh, 14 to 16?
No, 16.
Oh, at 16.
At
Yeah,
16,
okay. Yeah, I see.
Because that's the end of your.
Yeah. So
you
it was
can't
just
drop
a short,
out. You can't drop out before then.
No,
but
no, no.
yeah,
I dropped out the first time.
Yeah.
I could.
So it was a short-term
Yeah.
business, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, it was a learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you think you know about it. I'd done other businesses before, small things.
Mm-hmm.
I used to collect and sell cardboard. I used to collect earth and sell it to people.
Mm-hmm.
Collect what? Earth?
Earth, soil.
Yeah.
Really?
From the forest. I go and get it in the forest. Simple business.
Yeah.
I had a wheelbarrow and a fork. I go and get soil and bring it
That's
Wow.
and sell it to people door to door.
You must have been counting days to quit school.
I always wanted to be independent.
Yeah.
That's what we call
Great.
braskari in Icelandic.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
it?
Okay, fascinating. So you sell the business, and that's when you go on the world tour.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So just in a few words, what was the first location and why?
France.
France.
Because, I suppose a young man, 16, I wanted also excitement. So I'd seen in the newspaper that basically Saint-Tropez seemed to be an exciting place. So I hitchhiked from Essex, where I come from, directly to Saint-Tropez and found a job. First, repairing boats, the worst job you can have, which is cleaning the underside of boats.
Mm-hmm.
And then one night, I met someone in a bar, and he said, after I'd been cleaning boats all day, so I was filthy, he said, look, they're looking for people at the Papagayo, which was the most famous bar and restaurant in Saint-Tropez at the time. And I said, okay, I'm going to go and ask them. So I went and asked them, and they said, can you start tonight? And I said, yes. My French was good enough to just say yes to everything. And
Is that we?
that's it, we. So I started that night and never stopped. I mean, that was, and I didn't speak much French. And I'd never been in a restaurant before.
Mm-hmm.
But I just looked around, looked busy, and then by the second night I could do a bit more and just kept going. Great experience again. And I served, Brigitte Bardot, Roger Vadim, lots of, it was really, really a fabulous place for learning. Lots of work, to 14 hours a day.
How are you with languages? Did you pick up any French?
Yeah, I speak pretty fluent French. Yeah,
Really? Other languages as well? Or?
a bit of everything. No Icelandic.
No.
But yeah, a little bit German. My partner's Italian, so a little bit of Italian. She says not enough. And French, but a little bit of everything. I can, if you travel enough, you absorb language. It becomes a thing you can understand.
So for how long did you stop there in Saint-Tropez?
I was there for a season, and then I went afterwards to Australia. I went to Singapore, Thailand, Australia. Then I walked around and hitchhiked around Australia, all the way around the outside of the island, or the continent, and that took me about 7 months. And then I was working at lots of different places, lumberjack, mines. I mean, it's all outside work, basically. But great experience, met some fantastic people. And
you were always solo traveling, not with friends or anyone.
No, solo.
Yeah, independent.
It's quicker.
Yeah.
You meet more people. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I met some fantastic people, had some great experiences. A few dangerous ones. I mean, I was in Mount Tom Price, which is the mine, on New Year's Eve. I can't remember the year now, but there were very few women, ladies, girls,
very bad
in the mines. So they were the daughters of some of the managers who lived there, and so I made them a huge error. On this evening, I was there drinking some beers. Everyone was drinking beers. It's Australia, and I started talking to this girl, and I nearly lost my life that night. It was a terrible fight. Yeah, because I made the error.
Yeah.
I mean, this girl must have been with, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 of the guys there.
Yeah.
But you learn.
Yeah.
Be very careful.
Yeah.
Okay, so you said that you always wanted to be independent. I mean, at this age, 16, did you have like this big plan ahead of you? You know,
I had a plan.
You had a plan.
I had a plan, not written
like 5
down.
years plan or
no, nothing that.
No.
You know, when you're 16, you don't think 5 years ahead, or you think
You're right.
2-3 years ahead, 1 year ahead. I had a plan. It was a general plan. I said, look, I want to gain experience. My greatest fear was that I would end up nowhere. Yeah. That was my fear. Mm-hmm. And I think fear of failure is a very powerful thing. Now, and I was worried all the people I went to school with went to university. And I was worried that when they came out of university and got good jobs, theoretically, and I was, not having a good job or not making any money, that would then be a failure. So I had a plan, gain experience, and then start a business, just do something. Mm-hmm. Yes. And so that's what I did. And I gained the experience, and I purposely went from place to place to gain experience. The mines, I could have stayed there and made a lot of money, but I wanted to move and do something else.
Yeah. So would you say that is your drive, fear of failure?
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah. It's fear of failure, and I don't like to not finish things. I like to. It's the two things combined. If I start something, I want to finish it, and I want to do it well. Mm-hmm. And I like to build things. I'm not interested really, and never have been in business to be in business to make money. Mm-hmm. It's in business to create something. It's in business. You're in business. You need to make money to reinvest, but it's to do something different. I didn't want to be in investment banking or anything. I wanted to build businesses that change things, and that's what I've done. And so if I look back, I mean, all the businesses I've done, it's 10 businesses, 11 businesses. Each one of them, I learned. I worked with fantastic people. And they change things, most of them in some way, and the bonus is you make a little money as you go along, do the next business. But it is fear of failure, and that's still today. You have it. I don't think it ever leaves you.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. So if you take us back to Australia after the bar brawl, is that when you start selling encyclopedias, or
that was actually before then?
Before.
I came from Sydney down to Melbourne. And Encyclopedias Melbourne, then to Victoria, cut trees basically in the middle of the northern part of Victoria where the forests are, then over and round across Nullarbor Plain, worked on a farm actually in before the Nullarbor Plain, right in the desert where, and this was loading grain trucks with a huge harvest. And so that was very interesting. Middle of nowhere. We used to drive 100 kilometres to go to the pub. That's all there was. And on dirt roads. So it was in the middle of nowhere, really.
But from day to day, because we didn't have the internet back then, you didn't have Instagram to look at places to go, etc. What was the decision making? Were you just going somewhere, or?
Yeah, you had a map.
You had a map.
An old-fashioned thing.
Good old map.
I had a rucksack, I had a sack on my back, and a map. And people said, well, how did you keep in contact? Well, I wrote letters, and I didn't receive any letters, but I wrote letters to tell my family that I was still alive and somewhere in the world. Yeah. And that's what you did. I mean, it was, I explained to my kids today, because they're always on their phone as well, old-fashioned things, maps, and I found my way around and met people, and it was a different world then. It was a good world. I mean, it was, and you as you were walking, you got picked up by some really interesting people. Mm-hmm. Most of them in Australia will say, "Can you drive?" Yeah. And then you end up driving, so because they're tired. You know?
No work visa, not high taxes.
No.
Perfect world.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So after Australia, you come back to Essex, right? Mm-hmm. And that's when you start.
Sorry, did you never went to Asia, or?
Yeah, yes, and Thailand.
Yeah, you went at
Singapore,
time.
Thailand.
Singapore, Thailand on the way.
Okay.
And then from Australia, Then I came back, and then hot dogs. You know, basically, what do you do if you want to start in business and you don't have a lot of money? You go into the food business. So, and the cheapest end of the food business is hamburger and hot dog vans, and that's what I had. So I bought my first van and renovated the van. Went out and great business, worst business ever for meeting girls, because you're working every night and every day you smell like an onion. You just can't get rid of this smell of onions. But great business, great margin, low cost of setup. And then in the end I had 6 vans.
So you were just constantly
Yeah.
reinvesting and buying vans.
Yeah. Different sites.
What was the name of this company?
No name.
No name. It was
No.
just the burger vans.
Burger vans. People
Burger
didn't
vans.
care about brands then.
Yeah.
So
what about
all
the
at
food?
night. They were all open at night. So I used to open up at 8 o'clock at night, finish 4 in the morning.
Every day.
Every day. 7
Really?
days. And the trick was here, actually. It was being open when everyone else was closed. Right. So, and, you know, in Britain in those days, you know, everything closed. There wasn't much fast food, fish and chip shop and so on. And many of the sites actually that I had afterwards became McDonald's. You know, you go back there today, there's a McDonald's, because the sites were good by the side of the road, but good positions. And but fantastic business. You know, there's a limit to what you can do. So, and then after that, I started, you know, you use a lot of hamburger buns. I started making hamburger buns, and that's a much better business.
Making bread or buns.
Making buns, bread, yeah. And that became a proper large business. So that was my first big business.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you sell the burger vans before venturing into the buns, or did you run it together?
I did them together, and then I sold them to one of the guys that was doing the vans, because I couldn't do them both. Way too busy. So, and he paid me off over many, many years. Yeah.
And the bread roll business, is it essentially just a bakery, or?
It's again, it's sort of much more common today, but it was, you know, learning from what I did with sandwiches, but doing it with bread. And so I had no shops, one factory, and made huge numbers of, you know, rolls and buns for restaurants, pubs, and also I delivered to people's homes for freezers. This was at the time everyone was getting, you know, deep freezers, and so you could buy these bags of buns and you know, hamburger buns, hot dog rolls. Made only made 11 products, but very large numbers of them, and then delivered them all over the country.
So you were both servicing wholesale or B2B
And retail,
and retail
and
customers.
B2C. In those days, all on the phone, and you and very, very good service. You order today, you get it tomorrow, and very, you know, very efficient bakery. You know, and the busiest times we were making more than 1 million products in a month. You know, it was very, very focused activity. Hard work again, night work. You know, in the end, we were open almost 24 hours a day, except for Saturday, Sunday. We close on Saturday afternoon, Sunday morning, to repair all the machines. But it was a fantastic business, which I built up quickly, sold after 5 years to a private equity company.
Even in these days, private equity.
Yeah. I didn't even know what it was.
No,
So,
they were just buying.
it was a company that had cash who wanted to buy it. And so it's my first experience as well with
Selling.
lawyers
Oh.
and everything else. When you sell a business, you know, someone gives you a check and that's it. Here, more you know, there's a contract, and that was very interesting, doing that for the first time. The business still going today.
Okay.
Under the name Bread Roll Company.
Bread Roll Company. Very
Amazing.
simple name.
Is it nationwide in?
No, it's. I don't know how widespread they are today, but when I was doing it, it was up to Birmingham and south, and we did most of the country south.
Yeah, and how did this deal come about? were you thinking about taking the next step and selling, or did
Next
they
step.
just? Yeah.
I couldn't do any more. You know, as an entrepreneur, you know, you have to sometimes decide when your business is finished. There's not much more that you can do.
Mm-hmm.
I could have stayed and just made money, but I wanted to do the next thing, and I didn't know what the next thing was.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to, sell the business and move on.
Mm-hmm. And this is when you moved to Brussels.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why Brussels?
Well, I thought the UK was a bit small, and I wanted to go to a bigger playground, if you like. When I saw Europe as being a place of opportunity, where if you're entrepreneurial, there are lots of opportunities. I went to Brussels because I read a story about how in recessions, Washington DC always does very well because everyone works for the government, and therefore the economy's sort of not affected as every other part of the economy is. So I thought with the European Union, lots of people coming to Brussels and lots of government workers, that Brussels would be, and it was in the middle of a recession at this time. I thought I'd go to Brussels, and I went there. And it was what I thought it would be. It was very dynamic. It was the new capital of Europe, and there were lots of growth there, and also loads of opportunities. So it was the right decision.
How much time passed from selling to starting Regus?
I did another business in between.
Oh, really?
Which was apartments for secretaries. So I bought properties in Brussels and broke them up into small apartments, furnished them and rented them, sort of like furnished apartments. Common today, but, because basically if you were a senior person in the government, you could rent a house, but if you were a secretary or a support person, there wasn't much for you.
Okay.
So this was just packaging it up. I did that, and it was from that I got into the offices, and that was, what would it have been? I started in 1989, 1 year later. But I'd done that other business in the middle.
Did that spark the idea for Regus?
Yeah,
that
somewhat.
That business.
Did you lease out the apartments or just sell them once you had?
No, I rented them.
Rented them.
Fully furnished.
Yeah.
And very flexible. So, because they didn't know how long they'd have a job. And
so it was like a short-term lease.
Short-term. It's like apartment hotel today. I was doing it then.
Yeah.
So, about a year later. And then, from that business did quite well. And I was looking for an office. And in all my previous career, I'd always had factories. I never had offices. And I realized, it's very difficult. It's really difficult trying to get an office. It's not set up for the customer. You've got to deal with people that aren't really interested in your business, and the process is long and complicated, and so on and so forth. So I thought, again, gap in the market. If you can do it so that you can make that process easy, you will get customers. And I also saw there were lots of potential customers in Brussels, in coffee shops and so on, people having meetings because, it was a short meeting, too short to have in a hotel. So I put all that together and opened in September 1989 the first centre, and which we still have today. It's still operating today.
Was that a big financial risk at the time, or did you always have the cash to venture into?
Well, as an entrepreneur, you never have enough cash.
You'll have to figure it out.
But as a young person, again, this is the thing I always say to people when they ask for advice: if you're going to go into business, it's much better to do it young, because you can fail. You got to be ready to fail. So, it was a huge financial risk, but I believed in it and worked hard at it, and I made it work. Again, but it's not a risk I would take today. The version you see in front of you now, you'd consider it more. But in those days, I believed, and I put. It's like in poker when you go all in. I was all in on this.
Oh, you were all in.
All in.
Yeah.
Can you give us some perspective, like how large was the apartment building you were renting, and did you buy it right out or do a
rented
long-term
the
lease?
building, bought the furniture. and built it inside. The investment was, I can't remember, probably about €1 million. But in those days it was Belgian francs, so I can't work that out.
No.
But about $1 million, euros, that sort of investment.
And what's the time until you get your first customer? Everything must be fully renovated, right, before you get someone in, or did you already have someone?
No, I didn't. I needed the customer. I needed the cash flow. So, I opened with it at about 40% occupancy, 50 even. So, I started the marketing and the selling on the same day that I signed the contract to take the building and start the construction, because time was the enemy. I didn't want to be paying for space that I wasn't being paid for. So that made it, from a cash point of view, cash flow very, very good. And that I realised that I had a good business then, and you could do more of them. And then I did more, and kept doing more.
Can you take us through that process? Was it just natural that you would just venture between towns and buy up and keep going, or?
I had a business plan. I kept tearing it up, but I did have a business plan. So the first plan was to do the European capitals, because this was the time when the European Union was being formed and more countries were joining. And I thought, and there were many law firms and companies that wanted representation in each of the cities, the capital cities in the European Union. So I wanted to open in all the capital cities. I did that, and that worked. I also got a visit from someone that said, "Can you come and open up a centre in Beijing, China?" And I said, "If you pay for the ticket for me to go, I'll go and I'll do it for you." And I did.
What year is this?
This was in 1990.
Oh, really? Just a year after you started?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was a huge experience. But that sort of comes back to I wasn't worried about going. I mean, someone pays for the ticket, I'll go. Yeah. And I did it, and we opened up. And we still have that centre today.
Really?
As well. It's in the Kempinski Centre. And...
So you had a business plan, but were there any problems growing at that time? Was it hard?
I'll answer that by saying, when you're growing a business and when you're an entrepreneur, there's never a time when there isn't problems.
Oh, yeah,
so
exactly.
You sort of live on those problems, and you have to, being an entrepreneur is about how you overcome those problems. And, challenges are always there, especially at the beginning. I financed it personally for the first 9 years. And we were growing at 100% every year. So I made money, reinvested, just as I'd done with hot dogs and everything else. So you create cash flow, invest cash flow. I then took private equity twice, 2 rounds, then IPO'd. But huge amount of all sorts of challenges along the way. Different geographies, different law, different people, employment law. All these things, when you're growing a business, you have to get around. But look, it's like being an athlete. The more you practice it, the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Yeah.
And that's what those first years were about. Fabulous business. I mean, if you can self-fund growth at 100% rate, built quite a big business without borrowing any capital. That was good.
What was the growth trajectory? It was Brussels, and then what cities came
Brussels,
next?
Amsterdam, 4 or 5 German cities, London, Copenhagen, Stockholm. First one's in the United States. First one was in New York.
And there was no one competing at this point?
There were people in America doing it.
Oh.
Small, but growing.
But also, you're growing this fast. How involved were you? Did you have a right-hand man or an operations person, or did you do everything? Small team, yeah. How big?
Really good finance person, and a really good sales guy. And there were basically 3 of us, and we were young and fearless and got on with it. And that's it's all about dealing with challenges. And we would drive around Europe overnight and at the weekends taking furniture around. You know, some days we'd be up 24 hours. You know, that was, you know, and I you know, that it was that you had purpose, and that's
just picking up furniture too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because we opened a new centre, we sold it, we didn't have enough furniture. We drove from Berlin. I remember one day we drove from Berlin to Birmingham in England. And then afterwards we went out dancing. So you know, that's that's one of the benefits of youth. You know, it was because we took the team out, and it was, you know, and everyone helped. I mean, it was a fantastic beginning to the business.
Yeah, I was about to ask, like, if you look back, how much fun was this time of the career years?
It's fun.
Yeah.
You enjoyed the process.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the opportunity to be in business, look, I was never going to be a great footballer or wanted to be a sportsman or or an academic but I love business. I love building things. And if you have the opportunity and the honor of doing that, then you should do it. And we had great fun. It was the small successes. It wasn't. Everyone thinks it's about making money. That was we never talked about that. It was about building the business and small successes and
occupancy.
Yeah. Occupancy and price.
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing. I mean, that's what drives you on, and that's and I'm really happy when I look back at all the things I've done, and in terms of a career. You know, you look back at my age. You look back and say, did you waste any time? Did you ever do anything that you really didn't want to do? Did you ever work with any really bad people? And all of those things, I can say no. It was
besides the private equity.
The private, they were even good.
Yeah,
they were good.
okay,
I'll tell you why they were good, because they doubled their money.
Oh, yeah.
So if they double their money in 18 months, they're happy.
But of the first 10, was there anyone that was just a huge flop? Came into Amsterdam, it just...
Oh, yeah, of course.
Which one? And why? Like, what happened?
First one in Amsterdam.
It flopped.
Funny you should say that.
Yeah.
We got the wrong location.
Really?
Beautiful building, slightly off pitch, wrong location. So it took a lot longer than we thought.
And you're stuck in a lease, right?
Stuck in a lease.
Yeah.
In those days. We don't do leases anymore. We stopped doing them some years back.
So how does that work? You just...
We manage. We're like Marriott Hotels or Hilton.
Yeah, of course.
They operate. We're the best operator in the world. So if you have a building and you're a property investor, we'll come in and we'll operate it for you. We do everything, and it gives you a superior return, and it's a great amenity for the building. That's what we do. So the days of doing leases, it's okay to get going, but it's not something that's sustainable, because the amount of risk, even if you manage that risk, is high. And so even off balance sheet leverage is leverage. So the question is controlling all of that.
So in Amsterdam, you just managed to move to another building?
No, we made it work in the end.
Oh, okay.
You just work harder.
Yeah. Sell more. Okay, so we must be leading up to the IPO now.
Yeah.
How's that process? Why IPO? If everything's going so well, is it because you have
private equity?
Yeah.
No, IPO'd. We were one of the last companies before the dot-com crash to go into the market.
Weren't you just like the last one? Or
pretty much the last one.
Yeah.
So crazy.
Yeah.
I can remember going around America, first time on a private jet, because the bank gives you a private jet to go around on. And you go around and see all these investors and say the same thing 100 times over.
Presentations.
Same presentation 100 times.
Yeah.
In the end, I was with my finance director, and he could do mine, I could do his, and we interchanged it. And we ended up introducing words into the presentation that you had to put in. He would think of a word that I had to put in, and I thought,
like a prank show.
Yeah, because otherwise it got so, you lost concentration because you couldn't remember where you are. But I remember one time we just, we both had to leave because we put the words in together, and we had to go out and compose ourselves because we were laughing. But it was a very successful IPO. It was, I think, 6 or 7 times oversubscribed. Because I think even then people could see, look, real estate's going to change, and this was something even in those days. It was sort of the beginning. It was .com, but it was the beginning of the digital world, and people could see it. If you fast forward to today, I mean, the digital world we are in is what we dreamed of then. Yeah. It's there now as reality. So yeah, IPO. It was crazy. I remember I played golf in America, and my shareholding went up $100 million while I was playing golf. That's just before .com, and then after that, the whole thing went. You had this massive collapse afterwards. But it felt good. That was good. Play golf, make $100 million. Yeah. But the trouble is, you can lose it just as quickly the following day.
Yeah. So it must have been a really expensive and good lesson.
This was one of life's lessons. Yeah,
yeah, definitely.
Don't count your chickens until you got your cash in the pocket. There must be something like that in Icelandic that you say. So.
We'll have to think about
it. Will think someone
translate.
But I mean, how does that feel to, like, according to that Wikipedia article, it says that your net worth decreased from over 1 billion. To 80 million pounds in that bubble. I mean,
they got the numbers wrong. It really went down to,
probably.
It went down to 30, and those were things I couldn't sell.
Oh,
so how does it feel?
Yeah.
You can't sit there thinking about how it feels.
Oh.
You got to deal with it and move on.
Yeah.
So you think, I wish I'd sold a few shares at the top.
Yeah.
But
did you sell much in the IPO?
Small. When you're doing an IPO, it was about raising new money, not selling into existing.
Yeah.
But so not much. Again, with the benefit of hindsight, which is a wonderful thing, I would have sold some more. But look, in the end, I was there. It happened. Deal with it. And so it wasn't the .com that was the problem. It was the aftermath, where tech companies. I mean, I think we're going through .com 2 at the moment. .com 1, you had these tech companies that had raised lots of money, employed lots of people, were going bust everywhere, or reducing people. And so that was, had a very dramatic effect on our business. Not everywhere, but in the high-tech regions. And we'd opened a lot in Silicon Valley and places like this, and they were, decimated overnight, within a few months.
Yeah. Because most of them were your customers.
Correct.
Well. Yeah. Exactly.
And if you're long in the market and you've sold short, it's a problem. So, but we had to change the business model then, and we did. So we had to restructure, change the business model, rebuild again. When we did that, our competitors at that time were even worse off than us. So we were able to pull a lot of those in, buy some of those in. We did a capital raise. So they were difficult times, but they helped create the foundation of today's business.
And also, when you IPO'd, you took in some money. Then there's, of course, the crash, and you lose customers. Were you ever in fear of losing the business in those years, or was it just? You were. Yeah. We
didn't have any debt, which was a huge advantage. Because we just raised money, so we didn't have debt. But the sort of you look forward at the cash flow, and we had a war room mentality from the first day of all this happening, and that helped us. You don't wait. We used to meet every single day, twice a day, war room. What are we going to do? And you got to manage the cash.
Wow! For how long?
Well, a year. Every day.
Yeah.
And that's 7 days a week. You don't let up. You cannot waste a single minute. And it was great training. I mean, look, we've been through since then many crises. I mean, revolutions, volcanoes, tsunamis, earthquakes. I mean, just
COVID.
about
pandemic,
COVID. Don't I was waiting for you to mention that. Yeah. But we were prepared for COVID by what happened in 2002. It's 2001-2. That prepared us. So we had again war room, this time virtual war rooms because we couldn't get together. And we were, it was really difficult because of government action. But so all of these, you must focus on changing the model. And we changed the model.
When you say you changed the model, was the revenue strategy different, or did you diversify more?
We diversified on risk.
Yeah, and your biggest risk is
property.
Yeah.
So we started then to manage property, not lease it, not buy it. So today, we more than half all of our properties end of this year have about 4,000 buildings globally in 121 countries. They more than half of them are managed or partnered, and so that's a critical part, and the rest is all structured so that basically a problem in one country or one place or one centre cannot infect the company. Because this is the problem. It has to be very sustainable, and you have to risk manage. And we diversified a lot on the revenues, with different types of company, different sectors, different sizes of company, and all of that. Great, but in a short space of time. That's what war room mentality does. You attack the problem. You've got to. It's not about attacking what you think the problem is. You've got to imagine the solutions to the problem, and you've got to say, what do we do? How do we move forward? So exciting. I mean, it was exciting, but tiring.
Yeah.
That's it.
Who made the shot after 1 year of 2 days or 2 meetings a day to say, maybe we're off the cliff or through the worst now?
That I can't remember, but we still did. We just went down to one meeting.
Yeah. Well, someone that said, Mark, please, just one meeting today.
Went down to one meeting a day, and then, but even today, we run everything weekly. So we like to have a dynamic business. We don't do things by months. We don't do things by years. You're looking at something in a dynamic way. Otherwise, it's very easy to start. I see a lot of businesses where they start comparing years, and a year's a long time. If you're building a business, you've got to get on with it, and so weeks and months are important.
So what happens in the after years once you see that the business is?
Then we grow a lot. I mean, we grow a lot, and we basically
until the next crash.
Yeah. And the next crash, we do well in the next crashes because you had the Asian crisis, the Asian financial crisis. We did well through that. You had 2008-9. We did well through that because we were ready for these crises and we were structured with the right products at the right time here. But then came COVID, and that's COVID was the biggest challenge.
Yeah,
because this was government enforced. Not working from an office. So this, sort of was our most difficult time probably in the history of the business. But at the same time, it was the time of biggest opportunity. It was we could see that because the whole world tried out hybrid working from home, using computers, using Teams or Zoom, and it worked. And it was like the biggest test that's ever happened in work practice. But we suffered because customers were told not to use the office or were frightened of using offices, so they didn't use them. So that was a very difficult period, and it took some time to recover. It took about 18 months to recover from that.
Could you walk us through the strategic decisions and actions you implemented to handle the situation at that time in COVID?
War rooms.
Yeah, just the war rooms, yeah.
Cash control.
Yeah.
We could see, look, we didn't know how long it was going to last. And, it's like when you go to war, you could win tomorrow, or it could take you years. So we just didn't know. So we planned for the worst and hoped for the best. But the first thing you've got to do is you've got to really work on cash, slow down growth, conserve cash. And, you've got everything you thought you were doing in the business. You've got to go back and look at every single detail and do better. So you've got to tighten up. You tighten up all the rivets and bolts that are in the business. And you make it run better, run more efficiently. And we had to work with a lot of our partners and say, look, we need help to get through this. And the vast majority understood. They said, well, we understand this is quite difficult. If governments stop your customers coming in, then we'll work with you. And so by cooperation with many partners, we were able to get through. So this, we went from our most profitable quarter in the first quarter of 19 to basically losing money.
Yeah.
And that was because people were already moving to hybrid working at the end of 18 and the beginning of 19. But, COVID accelerated it. So what's happened since is just explosive growth. Yeah. I mean, we are, it just really is a whole new world because not all companies, but the majority of companies are looking to move to a different way of working, hybrid working.
Finally realizing the hybrid.
Yeah.
Hybrid way.
I mean, it was an expensive way to do it for us, but we could see it coming, so we prepared for it. But now we have companies wholesale saying, look, we want to move all of our people to hybrid, and these are companies with 100,000 people. It's not small companies are doing it because it makes financial sense, but it's bigger companies doing it as well.
I want to reverse a little bit. Before you said then came COVID, 2010, then came WeWork.
Famous WeWork.
Yeah.
Was
just
2010,
your opinion. Like, I think they started off doing similar stuff as you in 2010, and then a huge influx of capital, and they just seemed to go all over. How was it competing with them? And did you ever try and analyze their business and see, what am I doing wrong? Are they doing something new that I don't see? Or how was it dealing
Absolutely. So, look, when we saw them, we said, well, maybe, just like you said, that we analysed it and said, well, is there anything that we're missing? Is there anything we should be doing that they're doing?
Do you remember the first time you heard about them? Because they founded in 2010. What time do they like?
Well, I got in touch with them to go and see them.
Oh, just right at that time?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
I like to know all my competitors.
Yeah.
It's part of being an entrepreneur. You've got to know your enemy better than you know yourself.
Keep them close.
Keep them close, yeah. Anyway, but they didn't reply. They didn't want to see me.
Oh, really?
Anyway, but yeah, we analysed it. There's nothing... Look, it's the right idea, absolutely, because they do what we do, but the model's different. So they sort of do half of what we do, and, they got the timing wrong. They went into the big cities at the top of the market and fixed long. If you do that, very, very hard. And one of the problems was, excuse me, they had just too much capital. I mean, our entire business has been set up with about $400 million of core capital, like 400. They had 12 billion in the end. I mean, it's just incredible. I was saying, "What? Give me 2 billion, and I'll make that money work." But look, they were doing what entrepreneurs do, but they managed to get significant investment from several parties. But they also claimed that they were doing something quite different. They weren't unambitious. They were going to change the world. I mean, look, I met Adam Newman, very nice guy, and look, he's a visionary guy, no question. But business is about detail. It's about it's about making money work and investing well, and You know, that's what I've learned over the years. I mean, anyone can build a business, but can you make that business work? Can you make that business sustainable? Can you have you got the foundations right? And I've seen many businesses when they get too much money too early, they get it wrong because they get, it's quite difficult sometimes. It's as difficult having too much money as having not enough. Not enough sharpens up your senses. Too much does the opposite.
Okay, so did you ever sweat about them being a competitor, or you just didn't feel that much?
I'm an entrepreneur. I sweat about everything.
Okay.
So I don't worry, but I sweat and make other people sweat.
Yeah.
Because we have to,
So it's not when you're seeing these news, you're like, fuck, we're fucked. Sorry about the language.
I did say that.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
No, you've got to understand it. And we have multiple brands. So we have a brand called Spaces, which is a similar design to a WeWork. It's a better design than WeWork. So, we have 10 brands altogether, going from industrial up to sort of signature 6-star type operation. So, no, I mean, look, I've been in the business a long time, and I saw that eventually it would be a problem, and you can see that today. They eventually became a public company, reversed into a SPAC. The share price is down, 95% or something, but you can they're losing a lot of cash every month, every quarter. But they again, I'm sure eventually they'll get it right. But it's a much smaller business now today. We're about 5 times their size.
Can you tell us a little bit about the brands, the different brands?
The different brands, it's similar to a hotel company.
Because we only have Regus here in Iceland.
Yeah, we're looking for the right building, and then we'll do other brands like a Spaces, which is more aimed at tech companies, got more design in. And then you've got budget brands, which are more, you go right down to industrial, where we do studios and sort of workshops. That's at the bottom. So, and basically our market is about all of those different brands, because people in business or workers aren't all looking for the same thing. Some people want the best building in town, and want one very big large office, and others want to have lots of people working together in another room in a cheaper part of town. So it's about having all the brands, and then about having coverage. We're a great believer in coverage. It's about being in every town and every suburb of every city, so that you bring work, the ability to work much closer to where people live. So it's brands and coverage.
So all included, you said you have about 4,000 buildings. Which one is your favorite?
That's a good question. I don't have any favorites. I mean, it's we have some brilliant buildings. We've got the Chrysler building, beautiful building in New York. We've got the Gherkin in London. We've got towers everywhere. We've got converted churches. We've got just about everything. Some beautiful buildings. We're just opening in Egypt.
Where? Cairo?
Cairo, Alexandria, Luxor. We're doing one in Luxor. Egypt's fast growing for us. Some fantastic buildings with fantastic views. Looking out in Sydney, beautiful views. Looking out over the harbour. New centre we're opening here. We're not open yet. We're opening at the end of the year, but beautiful view over the bay here, where I'm told you can catch carp. Walk out and catch carp. Very nice. So, it's about buildings, views. I don't have a favourite. There's so many.
Where do you mostly work from?
I work from wherever I am. I'm travelling quite a bit. I have a farm in England and a farm in France, so I work from there. And I'm working here. I'm in here for a few days, but we don't have a head office. We don't. We work in a totally virtual way, the whole company, and so we've been doing that for a long while. So we let the technology do the work. But yeah, we have centres we're based in Switzerland, so that's where we have the most people, in Zurich. And again, very good centre for going everywhere. I'd probably spend the most amount of time there.
Yeah, so I was about to ask, like, what's a regular day at the office? You traveling salesman?
Aren't you based in Monaco? Oh, you
live in Monaco.
You live there, yeah.
But I'm, basically
traveling all the world.
Yeah. Our sort of main centre is Zurich, and then, but I'm just working for it's not a work for me is not a place, and I think that's the thing that's changing for many people. Work is about being efficient wherever you are. And so what I'm looking for is what many are looking for. I'm looking for a place in an airport where I can be quiet, I can do a Zoom or a Teams, and I can get work done. So the hour I'm waiting now, I'm not wasting it. With kids running around or, people eating food next to me or anything like that. I want to just get work done, and then I can get on with something else, other interests.
So what's a regular day? You wake up super early or?
Super early, yeah.
What's that, 5 a.m.?
5, yeah.
Every day?
Has it always been like
I've
that?
always been a bit of a problem, yeah. I sleep very well, but I wake up early.
Okay.
And, I like...
Do you have a lot of meetings? You have...
Lot is an understatement. I have 5-minute meetings, 10-minute meetings, 15-minute meetings, and 30-minute meetings. Not many that last more than 30 minutes because I do short, medium, and long's 30, sometimes an hour. But I'm doing them on Teams, and I've got people queuing, and I'm dealing with things quickly. That's the benefit of working with technology. You can be super efficient.
Yeah.
I don't waste time traveling. Even going from one room to another, is time consuming. I want to, get people, dial people in. If we don't have the right people, I just dial them in. And much more efficient these days with the technology. So, but there's no, and in answer to your question, I don't have typical days. I have busy days. And, the company's growing very quickly. We will sign this year close on somewhere between 800 and 1,000 new buildings in a single year. That means you're opening, 4 or 5 every single working day.
Yeah, wow.
That's, there's a lot going on. We've got a fantastic team, but it's my job to be, coordinating and also developing people. We're hiring lots of new people, probably around 3,000 to 4,000 new people a year now. And so, when a lot's going on, you've got to be present. And so that's lots of meetings, dealing with issues. But I spend a third of my time on strategy. We've got a very strong R&D team, and that's where I can add the most value.
And strategy for you is what? New markets, geographies?
Not geography.
Not geography.
Geography's easy. Product's difficult. So, we're developing new products for the future. So we're looking at how people work, we're looking at new technology, and we're pulling those together into new products that make it easy for companies to operate. And the big technology we're working on at the moment is sort of combining a company's real estate. So large companies may have 100,000 people in their own buildings, having a single app that goes over their buildings and all of our network, so that the workers can just go anywhere. And you have the same billing system, and you have the same management system and dashboards. And that's lots of products going with that make it easier and easier for people to buy what they want when they want it. And these are all business tools. So that's the exciting bit. That's the most pleasurable part of what I do, because we've got a lot of young people in that team who are, very bright, and I'm working with them. I have a great leader on that team too. We're thinking about what people want, not what they say they want. It's what they really want, and that's more of an art than it's not a logical thing.
We like to ask founders or business managers or owners that come here Is there any one metric that you just obsess about at the end of the week or every day? Is it revenue, vacancy?
It's definitely not vacancy because it's margin.
Mm-hmm.
You know, margin is the thing.
Like at the end of the day or beginning of the day, what do you like to check to see if the business is doing good?
Future margin. Metric. We have it on the dashboard, so
future
margin.
Is that a metric you look at every day?
Yeah. I have it on the dashboard. I can see it on my phone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not how much I made today, it's how much I'm going to make tomorrow. I know what I made yesterday.
Yeah. Is it inside the information if you tell us?
It's inside. We're public, unfortunately. And our results are in about 3 weeks.
Buy some options?
No, look, it's we're on a very good trajectory, that's all I can say. We've told investors that. It's not reflected in our share price yet. But, this is the new way that people are working. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of research out there. I'm telling people, but, they think that I have a vested interest. But lots of really good research by professors all over the world that are saying, look, the way people are and what people want is going to change real estate. And it's happening very rapidly now, where people want to work close to where they live or at home, but mostly not at home. It's near where they live. They want to work in a platform. They want to collaborate with other people. But what they don't want to do is waste an hour a day, 2 hours a day traveling in order to work. And, that plus it's much cheaper. Hybrid or flexible working, it's half the price for a company. And plus the carbon footprint is 70% lower the day you do it. These are important factors, and that's what's making it grow quickly. But it comes down to us. It's how much we're growing the future margin and getting the coverage that people want. And so it's 2 or 3 things I obsess with. I do it when I'm walking my dog. I sort of obsess about these things.
Yeah.
Is reducing the carbon footprint one of them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important. I mean, it's important for many reasons. A, all companies should be doing it. And we are carbon neutral, so we're zero carbon as a company. And we provide to all of our customers zero carbon space. Now, everything we buy is renewable where we can, but we're also planting forests all over the world to compensate for anything we can't get that's renewable. So we are sort of registered with AA. We want to be AAA. We're working now on supply chain to get all of that carbon neutral. So we believe it's super important, and we know that it's important to us. We know that it's important to our people. People want to work for a company that's not wasting or damaging the environment, wasting everything and damaging the environment. And I think, I'm not sure what the situation is in Iceland, but worldwide, young people in particular, and pretty much young and middle-aged people now, are aware that there is a crisis that is beginning, a climate crisis, and a pollution crisis, and a waste crisis. As the world population grows, and effectively doubled since I've been born, you just can't waste resources like used to happen. So I fundamentally believe it's important, regardless of whether it has financial value. It's what companies should do. But done well, it helps you get better people and keep people. It gives the company a sense of purpose. And it's certainly something that helps you bring in customers who also are interested in this. So I think it's vitally important in answer to your question. And I think in 3, 4, 5 years' time, if you're not doing this, you're going to have trouble keeping your customers.
I agree.
A little sidestep. You said you own 2 farms.
Yes.
One is a vineyard, right?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah, and the other, what are you growing in the UK?
Well, I've got 2 vineyards. So we got the biggest vineyard in the UK.
Oh, really?
Well, it's pioneering stuff. It's sort of it's right on the leading edge of vineyard technology. But we've got there about 500 hectares of vines in eastern and southern England.
What sort of wines?
Sparkling white wine. Still white wine, And we're hoping, as our vines mature, to get a very good Pinot Noir red, very light Pinot Noir we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But that's exciting stuff. That's after I started off in France. We have the second largest producer of rosé wine in Côte de Provence, and so we're producing about 6-7 million bottles there. And so we, big wine producer. We also produce a lot of olive oil
in France.
And we've got 650 goats, and we do goat's cheese.
I was about to ask if this is some sort of a hobby of yours, but it's
not
apparently a full-blown business.
It started off as a house with a small vineyard, and it sort of ended up quite a major business. So it's what I do on the weekends.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and but it's become a bit big now, so I'm putting in more management. But so it's lots of different things. It's forestry, it's farming, all totally sustainable. It's all organic. So everything I believe in, we do there. It's not. It's how can we improve the environment? So we have ecologists. We have, we use animals for fire protection. Things like that. Very important in Provence these days, fire. And, rather than chop everything down, we use the goats and cattle to clear the forest. And very interesting. I mean, it's a fascinating business. I wish I had more time, but, I'm busy with offices. UK, it's sheep and vines. And we have geese as well there.
Yeah.
But these are... And we have restaurants. So we have in France, we have a Michelin-star restaurant, and we have brasseries, and we have hotels, all on the vineyard. So, again, it's a great place to go. We have a lot of people coming from certainly Scandinavia, and I'm sure people from Iceland come. But it's you taste Provence, and we're in a valley that's quite remote, so it's quite wild.
So, and you're just selling this everywhere, or
yeah, we sell
wholesale,
it globally.
or
Yeah, we sell it globally.
Is the grand strategy to sell it in all of your offices worldwide?
No, I've never linked the two actually. It's so I haven't got that far yet.
No.
But it's actually quite a good idea.
Yeah. You should do it. You have good distribution. Should have.
Well, we've got 8 million customers, so
yeah,
we could sell, if we sold one bottle to everyone, that would be, we'd sold everything.
But just the final question on this: how does this come about? Like, you're just looking to invest, or
no. It's one of these problems I've got, which is, you start, so then you've got to finish. So I started off buying this beautiful place, which was a small vineyard and a chateau. But from then I got interested, and that's when it got dangerous, because I started buying more, adding more land, and trying to make money from it. So it would have been okay if I'd stopped at the beginning and just said, okay, it's like an expensive garden. But I thought, actually, this could be a very good business. And it sort of ties in. I think people will want to get back to the land. People that have forgotten what agriculture is and forgotten what the countryside is, that they would want, sometime in the future to participate in the countryside. And that's what we've done. So these places are very open. I mean, in France, we get 250,000 visitors a year.
Wow.
who are coming to experience the countryside and agriculture and so on. So what started out small, I sort of invested in. I mean, look, farming's not the same return on investment, let me tell you, and it's a lot more hard work, but there's a lot of rewards from doing it, and that are not financial. But I'm still on that journey. But I'm still enjoying it. Adding more management, new disciplines. It really is a very, very interesting business.
So I think I'm at least coming towards the end of questions.
Yeah.
You have. I just want to ask one thing. In the early years, you would start a business, know when to quit, and go on to the next one. With what you're doing today, have you ever felt like quitting or stopping to go on and do the next, or do you believe you will be with the group?
I can tell you that I've had some really bad days, just like anyone else. You know?
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? Because you can have bad days in a business. But a day that can start out badly, can end the day well. And you have to be persistent in these things. So the reason I'm still doing IWG and Regis is that there's still so much to do. So it's still pioneering, it's entrepreneurial, it's exciting. It's all the things that I look for. Mm-hmm. I'm working with some really fabulous people, and there's still a lot to do. However, age is something that catches up with you. So I'm steadily working on succession planning, and at some point I will have to stand aside, simply because the business is so dynamic. You need a younger man or woman that can pick up the reins and do the next stage, and that's just business. You have to be realistic about these things. And, at that point, I might be able to spend a bit more time on the farms, which I'd like to do. But for the moment, no change, because, for the foreseeable future, it is a great place to be, and I'm enjoying it. So nothing on the horizon, but certainly something that we're planning for.
Yeah, great.
Lastly, any advice?
Yeah, that's always the final question. We ask our guests if you have any for young entrepreneurs. If you have any advice.
Well, for young entrepreneurs, it's a simple one. Just do it.
Just do it.
Just do it. Yeah. You see, a lot of people spend too much time thinking about it and not doing it. So do it. And you'd be surprised what you can do with small resources and a lot of effort and tenaciousness. And start small. You don't have to start big, but do it and make sure you're working. Get some great advisors. Find people that are smart and have done it before and ask them questions. And the world will be a better place if entrepreneurs, more of them, just do it. That's what the world needs. To solve all the problems, you can't expect governments to solve the problems. It's got to be entrepreneurial people with whatever they're doing that come out with solutions.
Would you consider yourself as an overthinker or some sort of
I'm a terrible overthinker.
You are?
No, it's not. I'm an overthinker. I'm an actor. I get things done.
Overdoer, maybe.
Overdoer.
Yeah. Overtrade, overdo. No, it's that my mind
so
I'm
a negative thing.
No, it's not negative. So my mind, when I'm talking about something today, for now, at the same time, my mind's thinking about 3 years' time, 5 years' time. And so it's overthinking it in terms of overcomplicating it. So I have to discipline myself in terms of, creating plans and ways to do things that allow you to do it now and then make it better in the future rather than trying to get it perfect at the beginning. So I've got, unfortunately, a very active mind, so I come out with a new business idea about every 3 hours. So you got to keep it simple. You got to keep it into the doable. But don't lose your imagination, because otherwise, that's one step to being out of business.
Great final words, I think.
Done is better than perfect.
Yes.
Just do it.
Mr. Dixon, an absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining us here at Pingjan.
Thank you.
Yngvi, þá segjum við þessu bara lokið í dag.
Já, þá segjum við
þetta. Heyrjumst aftur næsta föstudag.
Vonandi.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you.
Bye bye.